lockup lounged in chairs that were backed up to the rail. "I don't know myself, Weed," Bino said. "Festering has something to do with a sore. Sometimes Goldman gets all wound up and gets stumped for words. Maybe he just made it up as he went along." He smiled and nodded in the direction of the bench, although showing Hazel Sanderson a genuine-looking smile took some doing. "If the court please, Your Honor, we do have a brief statement." Bino stood to his full 6'6" and glanced out at the 20 or 30 spectators in the courtroom. Dodie was in the front row, with a spiral notebook in her lap and a ballpoint pen in her hand. She was wearing a blue business dress that stopped a couple of inches above shapely knees. Her blonde hair flowed softly to her shoulders. Seated beside her, Half-a-Point Harrison was thin as a skeleton and looking worried. Usually nothing worried Half, except point spreads that didn't create enough action on both teams, and every other Tuesday when the grand jury met. Dodie flashed Bino an encouraging smile as Half clutched his windpipe and gagged silently. Bino adjusted the knot on his red and silver striped tie, then went around to the jury box side of the defense table and sat on its corner. He left his charcoal gray coat unbuttoned and spread his palms out on the table behind him in his best folksy posture. At the prosecution's table, Marvin Goldman rolled his eyes. The clean-shaven FBI agent sitting next to Goldman leaned over and said something. Both men snickered. "You all are going to hear some bad things about my client, Mr. Clements here," Bino said. "Some real bad things. Because it's the government's job to make Mr. Clements look bad, just like it's my job to make him look as good as possible." 12 heads moved as one, as the jurors gazed at Weedy. Bino tried to read something in their expressions. He couldn't. One girl, a General Services Administration secretary who Bino recalled from the juror list, was chewing gum, and the Mexican guy in the pink sport coat didn't look as though he could stay awake through the opening statements. If Goldman were to kick him right now, the Mexican would probably snap wide awake and holler, "Guilty!" Bino swept a lock of snow-white hair away from his forehead and sat up a little straighter on the table. His hands now resting on his knees, his expression more intense, he said, "But it really doesn't matter if what I say about Mr. Clements is true, or if what the U.S. prosecutor, Mr. Goldman, over there," here he looked at Goldman, who stared straight ahead in the direction of the bench, "says about him is true. What matters is guilty or not guilty. Now, I didn't say guilty or innocent, and there's a big difference. After the prosecution says what it's going to, and after I say what I'm going to, Judge Burns— excuse me, Judge Sanderson— this is Judge Burns's courtroom, but he couldn't be here today, so Judge Sanderson is sitting for him. Anyway, when we're all through blowing our trumpets, the judge is going to give you an instruction about how the prosecution has to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. You've all heard about reasonable doubt on lawyer TV shows, I know that. And the bottom line is that I don't have to prove Mr. Clements is innocent. I'm not even going to say that Mr. Clements is innocent. Heck, fire, look at him. His name is Weedy, for goodness sake." He glanced in Weedy's direction. Bino'd have to say this much for Weedy. The guy was keeping a poker face, even though his toes were probably nodding. Goldman's upper lip was beginning to curl, which meant that he didn't like Bino telling about Weedy's nickname before Goldman himself could get the moniker in front of the jury. Score 1 for Bino. Now even the jurors were looking interested, shifting around and scooting forward in their chairs. The girl from the General Services Administration had stopped chewing her cud. The Mexican's eyes were wide and round. Score 2 for Bino. He raised one finger in a teaching attitude and went on. "But the government hasn't charged Weedy Clements with smuggling a little marijuana or even with selling a little marijuana. If they had, you'd all be at home, and Weedy would have already pled guilty and be at Bastrop or El Reno or Big Spring or one of those other nice places the government has. But no, sirree, they've charged Weedy with conspiracy. They've got to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, mind you, that Weedy got together with some other folks and plotted. That he said to one guy, 'Okay, you buy the marijuana,' and to another guy, 'Okay, you bring it over the border,' and so forth. But that isn't all the government has to prove, not by a long shot. If Weedy just gets